Hello, I'm Allison Bowles, Director of Learning and Engagement at La Jolla Music Society. We launched our Education Ambassador Program after the opening of our home, the Conrad Prebys Performing Arts Center, in 2019. Each year, we invite an artist or ensemble to serve as our Education Ambassador. I work with them to design a residency that allows them to shine as artists and educators on and off the stage, engaging in meaningful ways with our community. For the past 6 seasons, I've had the privilege to work with extraordinary artists, from the visionary violinist, educator, and activist Midori, to the pioneering ensemble Third Coast Percussion, and beloved children's hip hop group, the Alphabet Rockers. This year, we're honored to partner with the artists and creatives behind the multimedia song cycle Cotton, part of our Protostar Innovative Series. Rooted in John E. Dowell's haunting photography of South Carolina cotton fields, this work explores an African American narrative of past and present, from southern fields where enslaved people were forced to labor on the land to concrete canyons of New York City. George Pritzker, my colleague from our artistic department, has helped me shape this year's Education Ambassador residency. And now, as a prelude to the performance, please enjoy George's conversation with John Dowell.
On behalf of La Jolla Music Society, I would like to welcome John E. Dowell. An artist and master printer for more than 4 decades, John Dowell's fine art prints, paintings, and photographs have been featured in more than 50 one-person exhibitions and represented in the permanent collections of 70 museums and public collections. Among them are the Museum of Modern Art and the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, France. John Dowell is a Philadelphia native and professor emeritus of printmaking at the Tyler School of Art at Temple University. And his work inspired and is prominently featured in the multimedia song cycle Cotton, which La Jolla Music Society is proud to present on January 16th, 2026 at the Conrad Prebys Performing Arts Center. John Dowell, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Your photographs of Cotton are not only featured in this performance, they are also the inspiration behind the project itself. In the past, you've talked about a dream you had that first compelled you to explore cotton as a subject. Would you tell us about that dream and the journey that followed?
Yes, well, I was had an exhibition at the Telfair Museum in Savannah, and and it was an exhibition of my cityscapes, and because I like photographing cities, especially at sunset, because people put their lights on. And when they put their lights on, I can see inside. In fact, friends of mine now have in New York have curtains. They didn't have before. But anyway, yes. And I started having dreams about my grandmother about 3 months before. And I have 4 sisters and a brother. And after the second dream, I said, "Are any of you dreaming about Big Mommy?" No. Well, then why I'm having these dreams? And so one of my sisters finally said, "Well, you know how Big Mommy was. So you better go back to sleep and get it together, because if you don't, she's going to come after us." And the thing kept coming back to me about the story she used to tell me about cotton. So when I finally got it together, what I did was that I contacted a uh, a farm agent in Savannah, and could I get some name of 3, cotton growing farmers? And so I called the first one, and he was very amicable, and they were the museum was broadcasting a lot and doing a lot of advertisement for my coming exhibition. And he said, "But it seems that you're going to be showing photographs of cities. Why do you want to photograph cotton?" And I says, "Well, I just got back from South Dakota photographing corn. He said, "You photograph live corn?" I said, "Yes, live corn." So immediately he dismissed me as like, this guy is absolutely a nut, you know. So, but anyway, he said, "Yes, you can come and things." And by the time I got to visit him, his daughter was there, who was strange that his daughter was in art school at Scab and in Savannah, and she was majoring in photography. And she wanted to come see what was I going to photograph, which she had been around all her entire life and hadn't paid attention to. So that's how it really began. And then you know, when I first visit his field, his place, I had never seen cotton before, only in photographs and stuff. So, and he got carried away. He was taking some of the buds and cutting them and showing me, and finally his daughter said, "Dad, he's not a botanist. Why don't we just let him shoot?" So that's really how it started, and I had a pleasant time that day. But he told me, he said, "You can be in this field and that one over there and that one." And I knew right away what he was talking about because I knew where I was. And so this wasn't New York City. So anyway, so I mean, and things went, it was good. And then he told me a couple other interesting things that this property had been in his family for over 7 generations. And I'm going, uh-oh, I think Big Mommy just brought me home. I just feeling like some of my relatives had worked this farm or something. And so that's how it started. The second day I went back, and then because I sort of fell a little bit and I realized that I had to get some boots. My sneakers weren't going to work in this stuff. And when I got back with the shoot, and it was interesting, in the afternoon, I had a rough time trying to photograph. That was the first of many experiences that I had photographing cotton. And so from things like walking through a field, and it's one thing to walk down a road, it's something else to walk across a road, and you really get really scratched up and things like that. And but it started this whole process of my imagining myself going through the experience of picking cotton, of going through. I knew a lot of the stories. I'd done some reading and stuff, and I started doing more reading about how uh, the person who's running the gang, usually not the owner, but the person who's running the gang, they're really being very difficult with the slaves, trying to make them really produce and stuff. And so this brought back all kinds of stories and things to me about my grandmother would say things to me like, you know, um, when you're in trouble, don't worry. Pardon me again. um, because the angels are coming. The angels are always here, they're always around you, and they're going to protect you. But you got to remember, it might be difficult, but the angels are coming. And so there's lots of stories and things like that. So that's how it started.
So from how it started and then jumping ahead to the last few years, Cotton, this production of Cotton was originally commissioned by Lyric Fest and premiered at the Philadelphia Episcopal Cathedral and at the Kennedy Center Terrace Theater in Washington, D.C. in 2023. It,
Okay, a little clarity. The artwork existed.
mhm.
Suzanne Duplantis from Lyric Fest and Laura, they saw the work and they said, "Oh, we got to do something. We got to do something." So they came to me with this idea of like, give us some photographs and let's send us to some poets. And let's see if they can respond to this. So they sent it to to 9 poets, and they responded to the work. They picked pieces they like, and they wrote pieces, which to me was like amazing. It's so inspiring because you do your work, you do your things. You might have an exhibition or two, but nothing else is generated from it. But to find people who are really enthused about it and want to generate more interests, woo, I mean, that's an artist's dream. Like, I don't know about others, but for me, it's like, wow. And so that's how it began, this process of putting it together. And Suzanne, sent things out to the to this poet, and she would call me and says, "Oh, these they're responding. They want to do it, and okay, that's interesting." So, and then later on, and she comes back, she says, "Oh, she says Damon Gear. We've been talking to him. He wants to put music, put words to it." I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Okay." And I'm going like, "Okay, I'm not going to get too carried away because this is going to go so far and this is going to go bleh, like a lot of other my projects. So, but anyway, Suzanne was very encouraging. I got to meet a number of the poets, and they were just so wonderful. And of course, reading their work and then meeting them and stuff. And so it was quite inspiring.
So you were maybe skeptical, how is this going to come together? It finally
Yeah,
does come together. How did it feel to see your work reflected back to you in this production?
it was quite something. I was quite taken aback in the sense that I've never given up control. And so all of a sudden, I mean, Suzanne says, "Well, uh, I'm going to animate some things and do it." I said, "Well, I can do it." She said, "No, no, 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 I want to do it." I said, "Well, Suzanne." So finally, I said, "Go ahead, do what you're going to do." And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience for me to see that. When uh, and then when she told me, that she had gotten Damien and he was interested in doing it. And then she was waited on, and waited on. And then she says, "Hey, guess what? Denise Graves from the Metropolitan Opera and Justin." And I'm saying, like, uh-huh, okay, she's still going. Here we go. And so we just, and so then it's the matter of, the nitty gritty, putting all the bolts and the things and the stuff together to make it work and happen. And then, because of the work, to having this tremendous uh, project of of blowing up the work and having it move around the whole auditorium and everything. That was amazing to me.
I know I'm very much looking forward to seeing this multi-channel video, seeing the photographs move in that way. Um, you just mentioned these photographs, your photographs of cotton. We're only seeing a small sample. You've been working with cotton for years. In 2018, you had an exhibition at the African American Museum of Philadelphia titled "Cotton, the Soft, Dangerous Beauty of the Past."
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about dangerous beauty. I'm thinking of how so much is contained in cotton, in this object. Can you speak to what tensions you found as you engaged with this subject over the years?
Well, there's a number of things. Right up front was that I quickly found that I could not just drive into the South and stop it and start photographing. I had to get permission. I met a number of farm agents. Some farm agents would not allow my wife and I to go alone. They said, I said, "Well," they would introduce us. I said, "When do you go?" He said, "Oh, no, we stay until you leave." And that was it. Upset my wife a little bit. She said, "That's a little frightening." I said, "Well, I know, but just let them do it, and we'll, we'll God's going to take care of us. We're all right. We're all right. And so that was some of it in the beginning. But the other thing was that what happened after a number of times, I mean, this was went on for about 11 years. About every other year, we'd go travel for a week or two going someplace. And uh, I finally found in, and also in South Carolina, in North Carolina, I found a farmer who really liked us, and we really felt safe, and so we could go and really photograph a lot there. And he did things like let me get up on a tractor, and he would go, and I could photograph, a series of things. So I did a number of different things I could do. But the most important thing was that I kept having all these emotional responses to certain situations, like, a couple of times like just walking through and getting ready to photograph and then not being able to photograph, that I just had to sit down on the ground and just wait for a while before I could work and stuff like that. So, and meanwhile, starting imagining all kinds of things. I mean, God, could I get up 5 o'clock every morning to face this every day of my life? What I've done, and then how would I have enough guts to run away, and could I be a part of something, or would I just acquiesce in taking everything? So all these self examination happened and that was an important thing. And my wife and I would both talk about that a lot, and so and that was it went. And then the other thing is that I really got into photographing the cotton. I mean, I was down on the ground on the thing, looking up over top with the tripod. I had three lenses, zooming in back and forth and doing all kinds of stuff to make good photographs. And that was, that was important. But the big thing started coming up is about imagining surviving that. And then the other thing that happened in 2015, um, we were talking to Mike Mayer, and this is in Hobgood, North Carolina. And I said, but slaves couldn't run away in the daytime. They had to go at night. So I told my wife, we got to go back and photograph at night. She flipped out because she got nervous being around a lot in the daytime. She would stay back in the car and do things, try to do stuff. And she said she could really feel it and stuff too. And so I went back in 17 and I photographed. And David wanted to buy all rent these lights and stuff. I said, oh, no, 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 no. You're going to mess things up. And he said, with light, I said, yeah, you're going to mess things up. I mean, slaves didn't have flashlights. Come on. They had to get the, you had to feel it and stuff. And I started telling me, says, the thing is, a lot of people don't realize that a number of the slaves, when they came, had religion. They were connected to a force. Um, Many of them, so, and there's a thing that we call kala, that ability to perceive and being aware of things. And they say roughly now, uh, roughly about 1,000 people a year are born with this skin over their eyes. And when they pull it, these people are very, very perceptive and singing. So I'm saying that some of these, excuse me, slaves had that ability. So the thing is that, and the other thing particularly with the Gullah people and with some others also, was that they knew when they died, there was a responsibility that their body left, but the spirits couldn't leave. They had to help and guide some of their descendants, the people through them, the ones who were hearing. And so I'm saying because there was a number of different things that a number of slaves could go 600 miles without a map. They would know when to hide in the daytime and when to go and to move and stuff. So that's why I wanted to photograph at night. So I ended up doing a series of different things that this happened after Susan she saw the major stuff and a couple of us of the newer pieces were in that, but not many. But that came about with this experience of photographing at night, which was really very, very emotional. Photographing at night is nothing like being out there. I mean, sometimes it wasn't so bad if there was a moon out, but when there was no moon, it was absolute black. That was, and so I had to have a flashlight to focus. Once I was focused, then I could take, a minute exposure. But you gotta get it in focus, and you gotta pray the wind's not blowing so you get little stuff with. So it was quite challenging. Yeah.
You've spoken about the first farm you went to was in the farmer's family for 7 generations.
Right.
You've spoken about your grandmother. You've spoken about what this journey um, has felt for you, and I'm thinking about how we can learn about history through reading, but it's a different thing to feel,
Yeah.
and it's a different thing to feel as a way to remember, to encounter the past. Um, can you say more about what can art do for people's feeling and understanding of history that's just different than other ways that we learn?
Well, the biggest thing is that, and this has happened with my work, it catalyzed an interest. And all of a sudden somebody goes, oh, I photographed a number of things in New York City because there was an area called Seneca Village that was the first interracial area in New York City. And so what happened was that I happened to be at the Historical Society one day and with my wife, and we saw a book that said Slavery in New York City. And I was shocked. I said, here, you mean I'm risking my life going down south and it's here? And so that's when we got the book and started reading and doing a lot of investigating. And we found out about a number of things that there were areas, this area, Seneca Village, uh, where, interestingly enough, the first piece of property was sold to a black was a boot black, and he bought some property, and then other people bought property, and a number of churches bought property because they had a place they could bury someone, and up until that time, you may or may not could be buried someplace, but you couldn't, control over it. So, but I think in my case, what has happened is that people have seen the exhibition and they get interested and they'd start doing some research and start doing some finding out and things. That's the big thing. And then they saying like, I mean, one woman in particular tell me, see, that's another way of looking at it. I've never thought about looking at it that way, And so that's what I think that's what art can do. And sometimes you can do that way with abstract art too, but you don't have to be completely representational. It can be done with color or without color or different things too. And so
I'm glad you just mentioned abstract art. I want to ask you about titles because titles can do a lot. Um,
They're the most difficult thing to do. Making the artwork is easy. The titles are. My
and
assistant and I go through this thing. John, you got to come up with something. I said, "Come on, you name it this time." Yeah.
well,
Yeah. Go ahead.
the the titles in this you have a title, for instance, "They Took My Sister,"
Yes.
and um, you just shared that it's a very difficult process, and I'm wondering for the ones that you came up with, rather than asking others,
Yeah. Okay. Listen.
what's that process like?
That title is in particular on New Year's Eve. In a lot of black churches, they have a thing called the Whites Watch Not service, and that was theoretically it's before the signing of the Emancipation and everything that they were hoping it was going to happen. So that it was the thing of watching. But what was important is that on that next day, on that night next day, the owner of the plantation had to go and make well all the debts and the bills and stuff. If he didn't have enough money, what happened was that the some of the slaves had to be sold and separated. So on that night, it was important that on that night, it was important that, of course, everybody was hoping that the owner had been very successful, had done what he's supposed to do, didn't over borrow or whatever and everything. But he didn't. Then your sister could be gone, your child could be gone, your mother could be gone. So that was always a night of terror. And that is something I just had a feeling when I made that picture was that they took my sister. So that's what that was about.
We discussed how poets selected photos, they drew inspiration. The poems inspired Damien Getter to write the song cycle. It's a cross-disciplinary work. You've had forays into cross-disciplinary work in the past. I'm curious if you could talk about what role music has played throughout your life and career.
Whew. It's been very, very important. When I was in school, I listened to music a lot. I came up with music in the church and I with rhythm and blues and stuff. And then at one point, I really went into uh, with jazz and classical, contemporary classical in particular. And I even got to know John Cage and Merce Cunningham and did some things with them. Uh, but music has always been that thing. How can they? First of all, I was always envious of musicians in that and composers in that at least people had to listen to hear. Whereas many times people walk into a gallery and they look around and in no way can they acknowledge what they've seen, look around and they walk away. And I kept feeling like it'd be good to put glue down and make them stick for a while, So I was always interested in that thing about that thing about time. And then eventually I start working out what time meant for me. And a way I dealt with time is by dealing with depth space. For example, you can look in your room where you are and you can turn around and look at that wall in the back with the things that's right there, but you can also look out at a window it's available. You can see it in an instant. But the fact that that's 3 blocks or 4 blocks away, you know that's longer. There's a sense of time because you have to do something to accomplish that. So then I started doing my work is by playing with space, making things float, making things be close, far away, and back and forth like that. So that was it. But meanwhile, I listen a lot, hear a lot of music. And so with that, I I also I'm hearing the music and stuff, I'm hearing that, but there's things like rhythms, there's things like listening to certain music and he's giving me ideas about colors. For example, at one point I was making some color lithographs and some watercolors and stuff, and I was using the primary colors away a little bit, and then I heard some some Quincy Jones, and particularly this thing when Quintessence, and when and I said, oh my God. So I start then shifting my color to I start doing things that were like blends, slight movement of color, not big ranges and stuff like that. So that it's stuff like that. And it's always also the fact that I'm trying to figure like how how do they get from the beginning to the middle and to the end? That how do you make that transition? How do you make that transition? And so that's why music has been really very, very, very important for me. And the other thing is that I wanted from music is like I sometimes I want my artwork to like turn the viewer on like a good you can have some music, all of a sudden people go, ooh, like that. Well, I want them to have that experience looking at my work. so I so I've always been that. I got to know a bunch of musicians. I used to ask them questions about my work, about my white paintings and some other stuff that I was doing. And, I did concerts for 10 years using my artwork as the scores for the music. And I never forget, Sean Cage says, you would have cut that out. He said, that's old. You would have cut that out. What are you trying to make like that? It's only sound, only sound. You can't do anything. And Merce said, be quiet. We got to have some romantics left in the world. So anyway, I mean, I consider myself very lucky. I've been very, very fortunate to have been around some really astute, mindful, I mean, musicians, and so like and people like Archie Shepp in particular that I got to know quite well and stuff like that and stuff too. So and yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Um, can I ask a couple more questions?
Go ahead. I'm cool. I mean, as long as you put up with my coffee, you know.
Oh, don't worry about that. Um, so Cotton was selected this season to be a part of our Education Ambassador program. As I
Hmm.
mentioned at the beginning, you are Professor Emeritus of Printmaking at
Hmm.
the Tyler School of Art at Temple University. Can you
That's
just share
correct.
a little bit what role teaching has meant to you and how has it influenced your art?
It's very, very interesting. I never thought of it. Teaching has been was important and has been in that, excuse me, it gave me a, a, a foundation. I could eat. I didn't have to do what somebody said. Somebody once came by and said, "Oh, those white paintings you do, they'd be nice and gray. I want one or two, three." I said, "I'm sorry, but why do you expect to do that?" I said, "I can eat. I teach. I'm a pretty good teacher. They tell me, and they want to keep me. So That's what I do. So, so I had a freedom to explore and experiment with things that I thought were important to me. Uh, and teaching, I is interesting in teaching. I got to you get when you because you teach with other people and everything. You're exposed to a lot of different various ideas, and you see how different structures are put together. And very early on, I in my teaching, I started being concerned with. I wasn't interested in producing John Dowells. I was interested in giving people ideas about structure, about foundation, about how do you convey an idea, how do you design it so you can get the most out of what you're dealing with potentially. That was the thing. And so with the teaching, it made me look and experiment with other ways of doing that. For example, for years I taught. When the students came in, I had a record player there playing music all the time. And I would give examples of construction and movement and things like that with with the music. Meanwhile, this made me think a lot about my work, about also about music and how to do that. And then I would do other crazy things like I was teaching a drawing class once and I took my students salsa dancing, and said like, how can you draw and do certain things? You can't even move your body. So, like I said, I've been blessed. I could get away with doing that. Some schools you can't get away with doing stuff like that. So,
To wrap up, I just want to ask what's in store for you right now creatively? What can we look forward to um, in the future with your work?
well, I've gone through a bunch of things. I just had an exhibition uh, about 3, 4 weeks ago where someone came to the studio and I said, well, why don't you show some of my older stuff? And they said, you know, okay, well, let me see. And so I took out a bunch of etchings and drawings and lithographs and a few watercolors. And they got people said, oh, I didn't realize you used to do stuff like that, and that was interesting. And at the same time, I've had this I've had this thing that I've always been sort of like always searching time and how to do that, with the space and stuff. And then all of a sudden something hit me was like, how come you've never done any paintings on silence? And my wife said, what? She says, I'm going to have a drink now. You want to talk about silence. You done lost your mind now. And so I've been working on exploring and reading and doing things about silence. And I'm working on a series of new paintings where it's the whole idea is trying to get a sense of silence. And it's like, no, I'm just keep these friends that come, students, say, you're strange, man. Everybody wants to party and everything. You want to deal with silence, man. Like, are you getting ready to die or some stuff like that? I said, no, I'm just trying to, you know, that's a question that's been talked about for over a couple centuries now. What is silence? And some people say you can really hear silence. And it's back. And they look at me like, I said, well, I'm just, I'm 84. I'm trying to hurry up and grow up. So, maybe I'm running out of time. I'm hoping not, but I just, I'm working on these paintings. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to seeing those. John, it's been an honor to speak with you today. We're all very much looking forward to seeing your work as a part of Cotton at the Conrad on January 16th.
Mhm.
John Dowell, thank you so much for joining us.